What if your constant battle with shame, with burnout, or with the feeling that something's wrong with you isn't actually about you, but it's about your childhood? In this video, we are unmasking one of the most important studies on trauma ever conducted, and interestingly, I've never talked about it here on the channel before, the famous ACE study. Adverse Childhood Experiences. We will uncover what it reveals on how your childhood silently rewired your brain, your body, and your entire sense of self, how this affects nearly every area of your adult life, and most importantly, what you can do to break free from the patterns from your past and stop passing the trauma to the next young generation. Well, let's see what science has to offer today. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and if you're new here, I'm not a healthcare professional myself, but instead I share a client's perspective here on this channel. In the late 1980s, Dr. Vincent Felitti, the founder of the ACE study, faced a weird mystery. He was running a successful obesity clinic at Kaiser Permanente, but something kept bothering him. The patients who lost the most weight were often the first to drop out. Not because they failed, but because something deeper was pushing them back. So he started asking questions, not just about food, but about life. Weight loss apparently goes way beyond food choices. And by the way, a quick side story, I myself studied a bachelor in nutrition and food sciences, and I discovered early on that losing weight and changing your body is not at all just about what you eat, but with which mental patterns you're dealing with. Eating is also a coping for dealing with difficult emotions. And Dr. Felitti discovered exactly what I saw during my studies, but 30 years earlier already. And what he uncovered truly shocked him and his team. A significant number of his patients had lived through childhood trauma, through abuse, neglect, violence at home. He began to wonder, what if obesity wasn't the core problem at all? What if it was just a coping strategy for pain that had never been healed before? And that one question led to a groundbreaking collaboration back then with the CDC, with the Center for Disease Control. Together, they launched one of the largest and most popular psychological health studies in history, asking over 17,000 adults about their childhoods. And what they found changed everything. So next up, we're looking exactly what the ACE study measured and why so many people don't realize they have been affected by it. And again, as a recap, ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. It's any painful, overwhelming, or unsafe experience that happened before the age of 18 and left a mark. The ACE study identified 10 of these key experiences, sorted into 3 main categories here. Category number 1 is abuse. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. These are the wounds that people most often recognize, so the obvious harm. Category number 2 is neglect, and we talked about that a lot here on the channel. Emotional neglect and physical neglect, often invisible, but just as damaging. And it's not just what was done to you, but what was missing. So love, protection, and the feeling of being seen, being heard. And category number 3, household dysfunction. In this category is domestic violence, substance abuse at home, mental illness in a parent, parental separation or divorce, and incarcerated parent. These are the chaotic environments many kids were expected just to deal with. And it turns out many did. Many dealt with those things quietly and alone, until that pain started showing up later in life. But here's something that might surprise you. The study didn't even cover everything. So no question about racism, bullying, poverty, loss of a loved one, being a refugee, living through war, or even chronic medical trauma. Just think about it. Even with only 10 categories, the results were already shocking. And now in the next chapter, we will dive into the results, because what they discovered was bigger than anyone expected. You might think childhood trauma is rare. Is not. Let me tell you that. So when the results came in, they shocked the researchers. 64% of people had experienced at least one ACE. That's nearly 2 out of 3 adults walking around with unhealed childhood wounds. But here is where it even gets heavier. 1 in 6 people, that's over 17%, had 4 or more ACEs, which means repeated trauma, Not just one painful event, but a pattern, a childhood shaped by stress and survival. But then this as well, 28% of women reported being sexually abused in childhood in Canadian studies. That's more than 1 in 4. And these are just the people who felt safe enough to answer honestly. Because here is what the researchers already knew back then. The real number is likely much higher. The original ACE study focused mostly on white middle-class adults with health insurance. It didn't reach people living in poverty in marginalized communities or without access to healthcare. So if that data already has shocked you, imagine what we would see if everyone had been included in the study. But the most important discovery wasn't just how common these childhood wounds were. It was what they did to people decades later in their adult lives. So what happens when you carry your childhood wounds into adulthood? The ACE study found that childhood trauma doesn't just hurt, it actually rewires your entire body, your brain, and your ability to function. Let's break these risks down in 3 major categories. Category number 1, physical health risks. With just a few adverse childhood experiences, your risk increases for cancer, for heart disease, for autoimmune conditions, diabetes, and obesity. This is definitely proof that trauma isn't just emotional or a mindset issue, it affects your whole body and nervous system. Second category, mental health impact. Now this is where it gets staggering. Adults with no ACEs 12% chance of experiencing depression, but with adverse childhood experiences, 35% of men and 66% of women reported depression. This is insane. With an ACE score of 4 or higher, there is also a 1,200% increase in suicidal attempts, which, for example, this study here shows. Let that sink in. Incredible. So ACEs are now linked to at least 1/3 of all adult mental health conditions here. And category number 3, behavioral and lifestyle outcomes. With 4 or more ACEs, we also see a 17 times more likely chance to struggle in school and a 7 times more likely chance to become an alcoholic. Also a greater risk for substance abuse, risky behavior, and incarceration. But the effects of childhood trauma do not just affect individuals. ACEs have a massive cost on our entire society. In the US, Canada, and Bermuda alone, the economic burden of ACE-related health consequences is estimated at $748 billion annually. That's the cost just of untreated trauma, from healthcare to lost productivity to social services. The ripple effects are everywhere, which makes the case even clearer. Preventing and healing trauma isn't just personal, it's public health. So the bottom line is, trauma is a collective challenge that doesn't just live in our minds. It is passed from one generation to the next one, and it's programmed into our nervous systems, our stress responses, our immune systems, even our muscles and organs. And we all can feel that inside of our bodies, even if we sometimes don't realize that childhood wounds are actually speaking in here. I also made a full episode about how unexplainable trauma symptoms are linked to childhood wounding, which I will link to you up here. So if you run from doctor's office to doctor's office without finding an explanation for your symptoms, definitely watch this episode. But how does all of this actually work? What's going on in the brain and body that makes childhood trauma so powerful? That's exactly what we will break down next. Trauma does change the body and the brain, not just emotionally, but neurologically and biologically. But how exactly? Well, it all starts with your body's stress response system called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Well, I'm not a born neuroscientist, but let's just call it HPA, okay? Anyways, the system is designed to protect you from danger, but with childhood trauma, it gets stuck in overdrive. When you grow up with chronic stress, your brain learns one thing: I'm not safe. So your body either releases too much cortisol, which then goes into so-called hyperarousal state. That state you feel anxious, you feel on edge. hypervigilant, and I made a full episode about that topic up here, or your body completely shuts down and releases too little, so goes into hypoarousal. You feel then numb, you feel frozen, disconnected, like you can't cope in any way. The brain literally changes as well. The amygdala becomes overactive, so you're constantly scanning for danger, more prone to fear and anxiety. The prefrontal cortex also gets weaker. So it gets harder for you to make decisions, to control impulses and to manage emotions, and the hippocampus shrinks and slows down. That means memory, learning, and emotional regulation gets impaired. The result of all that? Well, all the classic trauma symptoms we're covering here a lot as well on the channel. Panic over small triggers, emotional shutdown, trouble focusing or remembering things, constant reactivity in relationships. For all of these topics, we're already having tons of videos here on the channel. And beyond that, we also offer a free workbook which gives you all the needed tools and resources to calm a dysregulated body. If you want to download that for free, just go to understandable.net/book, and here you can download our free re-regulation resources workbook just for free. And by saying that, here's also the good news. Your brain and body can change again. The workbook is just the first step in doing so, but in the next sections, we will also talk about how healing begins even after years of carrying those hidden wounds. So when it comes to childhood trauma, here's one thing that most people don't realize. Not all the stress is harmful. In fact, some adversity, when it happens with enough safety and support, can actually make us stronger. The difference lies in whether the child felt alone or connected during the exposure to stress. A child who faces a tough experience but has a calm, supportive adult to help them process it, that child learns how to regulate their emotions and recover. But a child who faces adversity alone, or worse, from the very people meant to protect them, that child never learns safety, it only learns survival. Or how trauma researcher Dr. Gabor Mate says, it's not the trauma, it's being alone with it. That magic skill that is developed here is called co-regulation. But most people with high ACE scores didn't have that support, which means they enter adulthood still stuck in that trauma loop. So what can be done now, decades later, as adults? Let's talk about healing and working through those consequences. Here are 3 steps to manage and heal the consequences of childhood trauma. Step number 1, awareness and reconnection with yourself. Most people don't even realize what's behind their symptoms. They just feel anxious, they just feel burned out, reactive, or their body constantly sends them signals like fatigue, pain, gut issues. They have relationship problems, harmony addiction, procrastination, people pleasing, all these kind of things. But what if the root isn't in who you are, but in something you never had the words for? That's why the first step here is creating awareness. You can use, for example, the videos here on the Understandable YouTube channel for understanding what trauma really is, not just what happened, but also how it shaped your nervous system and your beliefs about yourself. Another thing which is great to learn first is how to recognize the subtle signs of dysregulation. So how does your dysregulated nervous system feels like, and what does it even mean? Also reconnecting with your sense of self, with your real needs, with your real feelings and boundaries. And it's not about fixing yourself here. It's about remembering who you were before survival took over. This is also the foundation that I show here in class number 1 in our premium platform. So we have so many things that are basically to learn when it comes to nervous system re-regulation and also connecting with your sense of self. First of all, developing that sensation if you never had that. Understand your nervous system. Also the well-needed skills and tools for re-regulation, learning about attachment theory. And the next thing is, that we talk about now in step number 2, relearning safety through relationships. Trauma that happens in relationship, especially in childhood, that doesn't just disappear with time. It lives in the nervous system, in the body's memory of disconnection, rejection, or fear. And because that wound was created with people, it can only truly heal with people. That's why this next step is about relearning safety, not in isolation, but through real connection. Practicing co-regulation, calming your system, not just on your own, but with others, and building safe, stable relationships where your needs our limits are respected, maybe for the very first time in your life. So letting support in, even when every instinct, this is how relearning safety through relationships looked like. And I have another course for that, course 1.5, that includes all the resources, all the experience that I made in the past decade on how to find the right people for your healing. Because this is the essential step before you can relearn and rebuild the skills you were never taught, which is step number 3 here. When you grew up in survival mode, certain things don't got the chance to develop. Not because you're broken, but because no one showed you how. No one taught you how to. Name and express your emotions without shame, for example, or ask for what you need without guilt, set boundaries without fear, or even trust your own inner signals and intuition. That's why real healing includes learning the life skills that trauma interrupted, and not just in theory, but through practice, bit by bit, in safe spaces until self-expression feels less dangerous and more like coming home to yourself. I share on understandable.net how I learned all of these skills in more than 40 video courses. Those courses include everything that I learned while working with 4 therapists in the past years, and I also included a ton of exercise that I have directly from my therapist. So I created a ton of courses exactly on those specific skills: feeling and expressing emotions, recognizing and communicating needs, setting healthy boundaries, stop to overthink, and start trusting and building an authentic self and identity. And if you want to join those courses, you can start a 7-day free trial. Just go to understandable.net and you can start your free 7-day trial right here. The ACE studies showed us how much damage early trauma can cause, but our healing from all of us is the living proof that this story can change. So we don't need to pass our generational trauma to the next generation. We have the power right now to interrupt the cycle today, any one of us. And I hope that I'm providing a lot of helpful tools and resources on exactly that here on this channel and on my website understandable.net. And by the way, there's also a quiz that you can attend to figure out your own ACE score on americanspcc.org. I will put the link below today's video. And if you want to share your score, definitely do so in the comments. I'm curious to read. If you want to support this project, this podcast and channel, definitely check out our premium courses at understandable.net. And I see you next Sunday here on the channel for a brand new episode. Have a great day.